But yeah, my politics was always around my household when I was young. And when you grow up with that, you start asking questions based on what you've heard your parents talking about. So I remember going into school and speaking to my teacher and saying, why did Labour lose the election? This was 1979. And teacher, he was the deputy head. He went, what a marvellous question.
My name is Johnny Ball, and I'm the founder of CampaignForce, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. This Veterans in Politics podcast is a set of interviews brought to you by CampaignForce and sets out to explore how the military community can help make our politics a better place. I lean into my little black book of contacts and sit down with individuals from across the world of politics, sharing secrets, giving tips and advice, and inspiring the next generation. We are CampaignForce. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
In this episode, Jonny sits down with Clive Lewis MP. Jonny and Clive really hit it off in this episode with much in common. Despite coming from different political teams, it goes to show that when you get two people together from the armed forces, there really is more to talk about what unites you than divides you. They chat about going on ops, where Clive, like Jonny, served in Afghanistan, Clive's formative years in Northampton, the relationships with their dads sparking political interest, and about the civil rights movement. This episode is packed. It's time for you to meet our guest.
Clive, great to see you. How are you today? It's great to catch up again.
Yeah, it's good. I'm all right. I'm a little bit tired. I had a late night last night. I had a busy day yesterday. I had the police crime bill. I gave a speech, but there's a lot of toing and froing, writing articles. It's a busy day yesterday, and then quite a lot going on at home. You might sometimes catch my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter in the background kind of crying, and she may try and come in, but hopefully my wife's got her on a tight leash. But yeah, it's been a busy time recently, but not too busy to come on the show. I'm looking forward to this. No,
I'm really excited to catch up. We had a really good call the other week, and it's clear we've got quite a lot in common, as well as perhaps from our political worlds, quite a few differences as well. But one thing that we do have in common is about family, and I was really interested to read about you in growing up in Northampton, obviously the county that I live, and I lived in Northampton as well. But as a young man growing up in Northampton, how important was family to you?
Massive. It was everything, really. My family, my dad is from Grenada, and my mum is English, from London. And my family moved from London to Northampton in the early 70s. I moved down there with them. And most of the family I grew up with were my extended family, Northampton, my English family. So my cousins, my aunts, uncles, nan and granddad. And the council estate we moved into became another extended family. It's a very close-knit community. People's moms used to pick up children from school and look after them and things. I'm sure those things happen now, but I think I've lived in places where it doesn't happen quite frequently. But there was a real sense of community and a sense of family. So my family, big influence on me. My dad, my granddad, who was in the Paras, come on to that later, in the Second World War, Normandy and all that. So there was a lot of family. It was a big influence on my life, really.
Yeah, and I think we both we spoke about our dads fondly, about sort of coming home from cadets as a young lad. I would be allowed to stay up late and watch Question Time with my dad, and throwing cushions at the TV as a young lad. And I think that's something you can identify with too, right?
Yeah, I can. I mean, the first thing is, the first night, my dad still tells the story. He's a trade union official. And this was in the 1980s. And I came home in uniform. And I positioned my uniform after months of going in civvies, and you're like, when am I going to get my uniform in? And I finally got it. And I turned up in my beret. I was in the Pioneer Corps, Gravediggers, as we were called. And no offense to anyone that's in the Pioneer Corps, if it's still going. We got back, and I stood on the doorstep. And I kind of hunched over and I stood there, and my dad saw me, and he said, he thought the military had come for him. He thought thought Thatcher had put the lists out, and that they were sending the military round. They opened the door. It was relief and then joy. He was so proud. He was taking pictures of me. But anyway, yeah, my dad obviously is a trade unionist. He was, rallying around I remember him getting awards from the miners for raising money and buying food for them during the miners' strike. It's a very politicized time. My granddad was a trade union engineer and a trade unionist. And, I used to sit there with them watching political shows like Brian Warden, Weekend World, and I would pick things up from them, listening to their conversations. And that's where I began to get an interest in politics. But yeah, my politics was always around my household when I was young. And when you grow up with that, you start asking questions based on what you've heard your parents talking about. So I remember going into school and speaking to my teacher and saying, why did Labour lose the election? This was 1979. And teacher, he was the deputy head. He went, what a marvellous question. Well, let me try to explain that. Basically, Labour borrowed too much money. They couldn't pay it back. So they lost the election. Now, obviously, where I am now, I would take issue with that, but nonetheless, that was the answer I got, and I think the fact that I remembered that kind of implies to me that these were important memories, important moments in my life, because I obviously reflected on them. They went into my deep memory, so my long-term memory. So very influential. My family.
Yeah, that really resonates because, like you, as a kid at school, we had pottery class and we were tasked with making a Toby jug. All the other kids, they did like footballers, pop stars and stuff. I did the Prime Minister of the day, which was John Major. It was quite good, actually. I got his name top lip, really well done. But I mean, that's pretty niche for a 12-year-old kid.
The real one or the spit image one? Because I think that was famous.
I think that was my influence, actually. But the other thing that that we have in common as well is that military service, and obviously this is Veterans in Politics. And I've been speaking to a few people about and sort of explaining when I talk about those MPs of a military background, obviously your name pops up, and a few of my friends actually expressed surprise about your link to the military, and it's not really something that you go on about much. Why do you think it's not that well known, and why do you think that my friends were surprised, and should they be?
No, they shouldn't be surprised, because I understand why they might be. It's the military is a very establishment organization in terms of the people, not all, but many of the people who will end up in there. They will have a very, what I would call, traditional, very specific view of the world, perhaps of the monarchy, perhaps of how society should be organized. And that's not everyone, because I found that out when I was in the army. But it's definitely in there, and it's definitely, I would say, the prevalent kind of view. And I challenge that inside. But there are limits to what you can challenge. There are limits to what you can say as a Republican, and a Republican with a capital R, not as in a paramilitary Republican. So I think, in terms of, and I think that raises questions to people about why on earth would you be in the army? Well, and I guess you have to go back to my influences from my granddad. My granddad on my English side was a very big influence on me. I really gravitated to him a great deal, and he would tell me a lot of stories about his time in the military in France, in Normandy. And I was amazed and mesmerized by his stories, because they were good stories. If you've been in a war, like the Second World War, you're going to have some good stories. And he had some crackers, some corkers. And I was a young boy. I liked watching war films. I liked, playing war at playtime. And I think when I got to a certain age, I obviously went into the Army Cadets. I had a good time in the Army Cadets. I had a bad time in the Army Cadets. I experienced quite bad racist bullying from some real kind of proper National Front thugs who were in the cadets when we went to summer camp and stuff. But that was an exception. The majority of the kids that I met in the cadets were great, but they put me off a bit. I'll be honest. The kind of black in the Union Jack was said to me a few times, or rather screamed in my face. And I went away, and I obviously went to journalism. And when I was doing journalism, my granddad. I don't know if other people have noticed this of their grandparents, but the older you get, the more the key moments of your life come into focus. And he went through a phase between his 50s and 70s where he didn't go back to Normandy, didn't do much. As he got a bit older, it started to take on more and more meaning for him. And I used to go back with him. And that sense of camaraderie, that sense of belonging, that sense of achievement, of done something with their lives, it just, I think, just resonated with me in a way that few things did. And it rekindled my kind of the military side of things. And I went back in and I investigated. I ended up joining the Rifles. And I wanted to push myself as far as I could go, physically, mentally. And if you go into the army, you go into the reserves, it does that. You know, how many people, spend the weekend getting trashed? You spent the weekend problem solving, assault courses, platoon attacks, night patrols, ambushes. Yeah, it's hard at the time, but you come back with a sense of, I did something, and you're part of a team, and you have that camaraderie. So I loved it. And politics of the military and so aside, that's what I got out of it, and that's what I enjoyed. And I became an officer, and I had some of the best times of my life, training, and I miss it, if I'm honest. Now, I think clearly I served a tour of Afghanistan, and that was, I think anyone that's been on a tour, an active tour, I was the OC of a combat camera team. And if you want to know what that is, that's basically, I was thinking about it, how would you describe it? If you've seen Full Metal Jacket, the Joker Man, is that you, John Wayne? Is that me? That one? That's combat camera. So they were out on patrol with the infantry or with the cavalry or whoever it was. And, a lot of the time, no one was filming. You had your rifle up to your shoulder. So it was an intense experience. What I will say is this: it is possible to be able to be in the military and also be left wing, and also to have an understanding. I've found out things now about my understanding of the world, of the military, which perhaps wasn't there before. And the thing I always say to people, especially on the left, is this: people in the military, they're our sons, our daughters, our brothers, our aunts, our uncles, our cousins. Most of them are working people. And, they don't decide which parts of the world they go into or the wars they fight in. They're there to serve their country. And it's the politicians who make the decisions about where they go. So if you have an issue with military intervention, it's the politicians. The vast majority of soldiers I've ever met have been professional and courteous and great. Of course, there are exceptions to that. We all know that. But ultimately, I think in my field of work, in politics, where I am in politics, there is a sense sometimes that those with a military background, those who aspire to be in the military or part of the military, will have a certain set of politics and worldview. Well, sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. And I'll finish on saying this. I think it was wrong to go into Iraq. I think it was wrong for us, the country, to go into Afghanistan. I now have a better understanding. And whilst it was a very tough time, I don't regret the experience I had. But I don't think we should have been there. But I don't think I'm the only person of a military bent that probably thinks that now. And that's the beauty of hindsight, I suppose, and learning lessons. Has our country learned those lessons? I don't know. I'd like to think they have, but I doubt it.
Wow. There's so much to unpick that. I mean, that connection to your grandfather, absolutely. For me, indeed, I followed his footsteps and joined his Forebear Regiment. So he was in the Royal West Kents, and I joined the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. So I've actually got his cap badge right in front of me now as I'm speaking, and look at it every day. Yeah, he's very cap badge. And so, yeah, that really connected to me. And actually, what was interesting to see how the military, you were able to transfer your civilian skills into that military context, which is really interesting. It's something I bang on about all the time because it doesn't happen often enough. But that experience you then took into politics too, because you were Shadow Defence Secretary for a while, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I recall in an interview with a journalist, you were talking about your first debate from the dispatch box, and it was on Trident. Perhaps we won't unpick Trident at the moment, but But how do you prepare for big moments, big speeches like that? I'm really fascinated to know, because we're humans. How do you cope with nerves? How do you cope with speaking on such a platform? Is it daunting?
Yeah, it is deeply daunting. And that, as I said in that article, I stood up and there was Boris Johnson, the new foreign secretary. I think it was Boris Johnson, new foreign secretary. I'm pretty sure it was. Theresa May, who'd just been elected, and a whole host of Tory grandees, these big names. And there was little old me, Councillor State Clive, and I was stood up. And as I was saying, this was obviously not the best of times for the Labour Party in defence policy and unity, because I think about half of the PLP were busy kind of throwing their papers and whatever they get their hands on at me. Well, there was a lot of booing going on because obviously we were taking a position that we were against Trident and it was against party policy, actually, it turned out. But Corbyn was elected as leader or someone who didn't believe in the real Trident. So obviously the government had kind of created this debate for this very reason. And it was nerve-wracking. And when I stood up, I remember thinking, it's almost like, what else are you going to do? Are you going to sit and go, I'm not standing up. I can't do this. You do it. And it reminds me, when I went to Canada with the army, I volunteered to do parachuting, skydiving as it was. And I was talking to a sergeant and I'd already committed just before we went out. And I said, so you've been before? He went, yeah. I said, so what is it, static line? He looked at me, spanned over there. I went, well, how do we get out? He says, you climb out of the plane onto the wing, you shimmy along the wing, and then the instructor tells you when to let go. You go back like that. And I said, you shitting me like that? And he said, no. And no word of a lie, that's what happened. You went up to, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 feet. They opened the door. You trained on the ground. And I said, I'll go first. And you have to go out. You have to step out with the wind. Put your foot on the little zip, and then you shimmy along the wing, hold on, look over, and then you go like that, okay? And for me, that first step of going out the plane was pretty much like, if you can do that, you can stand up at a dispatch box. So I guess in so many ways, what the military taught me was that what you think is impossible is possible. And that dispatch box was trying, was difficult, but it was no more difficult than stepping out of a plane at 4,000 feet, so.
That's a great analogy. I remember that one when I'm a bit scared about doing something, like speaking to an MP on a podcast, for example. You just got to get on and do it, haven't you, really? Certainly getting out of your comfort zone. But it's funny, actually, because just picking up, you referred to yourself, I'm sure it was just a quip, but as Councillor State Clive. And, you were the first from your family to go to university, and you went on to train in a profession such as journalism, and you became an army officer. So what do you think would have become of sort of that young Councillor State Clive if those kind of opportunities hadn't been afforded to you? What do you think would have happened to you? And how can we inspire other sort of working class kids to aspire for more?
That's a big question. Look, when I grew up, Northampton was a town which had millions of pounds of investment from the then Labour government, and then I imagine Conservative governments after, but definitely the Labour government set it up as one of the new towns. And, I grew up in a warm, secure council house where the rent was affordable. I went to a comprehensive school where I was in a school system where everyone was given the same chances. They weren't great chances, but they were chances. Because if you went to school in Northampton, education wasn't brilliant. And it was dependent on the school that you went to, but it was comprehensive. Everyone got the same education. Whereas now it's fragmented in so many ways. I got a grant to go to university. So all of these things are things for me which Labour governments have provided. And that made a massive difference to my life and my life chances, as well as having parents that push me to do that. If I didn't go to university, well, I look at some of my friends that didn't go. Some of them have done well. They're still in Northampton, many of them, and they have lives, family lives. I could have had a life like that. But being a young black boy, I could have ended up fine. But I think, we all know, we've all seen the figures for, black people in custody, black people in the criminal justice system, and so on. There's a bigger chance that I would have ended up going astray. And I do have people who I used to hang up with. I won't call them friends, but people I knew, I grew up with, I hung out with when I was younger, who have been, lifelong heroin addicts. or on opiates for most of their lives, still are. You know, there was a dark possibility that I may not have ended up in a good place. I could have ended up in a bad place. But, you know, that's a kind of alternate reality, that what if, and I'm not sure what would have happened. All I do know is that my family, my community, from the government of the day, gave me some life chances. Now, I look today, and without being overtly political on your podcast, we don't live in a meritocracy. We simply don't. And the life chances that many people have are limited. And I remember asking someone from the Salvation Army about, I was out with him when I was a candidate, and he was a colonel, and he'd been doing it for more than 20 years. And I sat in the car next to him, and I was thinking, I've got to ask this question because it's really bugging me. I need to get it out. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, of course you can. I said, I hope it isn't offensive. He said, it's not. I said, do you think many of the homeless people that we're going to see tonight have kind of made the choice to be homeless? And he said, that's not a stupid question. He said, I've thought about it long and hard myself over my career. And I'll tell you the answer I give is this. I go into schools and talk to small children at school. And I tell them about the Salvation Army. I come in my uniform. And when I come in and the teachers introduce me, the head teachers introduce me, they sit there cross-legged, all these little 5, 6 and 7-year-olds looking up at me. And you look at their faces and you know that statistically, 20 or 30% of them will end up homeless, on the game, drugs, criminalized, whatever it is, maybe more, depending on the school that you go to. And he said, I look at them there and none of them are sat there thinking, I want to be a drug-addled prostitute. I want to be a drug dealer. I want to be homeless and begging. None of them sit there, mate. But the family that they're born into are given certain chances, and those chances narrow. And the choices their parents make for them or don't make for them begin to narrow their opportunities. And then as they grow older with those limited and decisions that they make get narrower and narrower until they're on the street, until they are. And he said, is that their fault? And I said, well, they made the choices, but clearly the choices that they were able to make were limited. And he said, exactly. So they said, there is no easy answer, but you can see the society we live in and the life chances that people have are kind of in many ways predetermined before they're even born, and the families they're born into, the communities they're born into. And it was a real revelation for me, because it made me realize, actually, when I see homeless people, when I see people in distress or poverty, it makes me think that we do not all have the same life chances. And I think in politics, you get people that are genuinely trying to enhance those life chances. But I think at the moment, we've got an economic system which is so skewed that there are large numbers of people who don't even have the boots to pull their boots up. And there are so many impediments holding them back. And people can say, well, I had it tough. I made it. Well, that's great. But if you want to maximize that, not everyone will make the right chances in a tapering scale of chances. And I think ultimately, if we want to maximize that, we've got to give people those opportunities and life chances. And that's not happening at the moment on a scale that I think is acceptable.
It's really powerful hearing you speak like that. And that example, I'm sure for our listeners, will have really hit home. And to hear you speak so passionately as well, it certainly has for me, standing here listening. And that life chance agenda is something I'm deeply passionate about. And I often think, if my family hadn't moved out of Southeast London, into that kind of growing London overspill of Kent, what would have happened to me? Would I have been the first person in my family to go to university? Probably not. So that's really powerful. But here you are. You're kind of a living embodiment of that life chance agenda for some of those opportunities that you've grasped that have come towards you. And one of those opportunities was going for Labour leadership. Are you going to have another stab at that one day?
You know what? When you're looking at, I think for some people who are thinking of going into politics, and I was one of them, there is a sense of you look at politics through the lens of television and people making decisions and being in the thick of it, and you see that the further up that greasy pole you get, the more in the thick of it you are, quite literally in the thick of it. I think I think it's very easy to look at that and think, oh, I fancy a bit of that. I could, you know, a bit of West Wing. I could make those decisions. I could, yeah, I could, it's quite pressurized, but hey, you're making big decisions that matter and make a difference. And I think it's quite tempting. But when you're in it, there's an expression which is the hardest job. The second hardest job in politics is to be prime minister. The hardest job in British politics is to be leader of the opposition. And let's face it, on the current trajectory we're on, that's the only way in the near future that someone like me is ever going to be leader of, not prime minister, but leader of the opposition. And I think when you look at it, I've watched Ed Miliband. I watched how it ended for Tony Blair. I watched how it ended for Gordon Brown. I watched how it ended for Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm watching how it's going for Keir Starmer. And you know what? You've got to be a sucker for punishment if you want to be leader of the Labour Party. There is nothing romantic about it. It's blood, sweat and tears. So knowing that, knowing how it can destroy your life, your reputation, and still want that, I have to say, I have days where I think you don't want that. Why would you want that? But then I think, are there days when you think, actually, what's the point of being in politics if you can't really enact your vision and what you want to see happen? And being a leader will help you do that. So I'm torn between the two because I quite like my life. I don't have people outside my doorstep when I step out, thankfully, at the moment. I don't have people going through in great detail with a fine-tooth comb everything I say, although by and large you get a bit of that, but not as much as you do. So I guess a long-winded answer to your question is maybe, but at this moment in time, no. So one day possibly, but at this moment, no. That's my most honest answer. I can't put it any more blunt than that. And when the moment arrives, I might just say, nah. So,
I mean, that wasn't even a politician's answer. That was a proper sort of, analysis. I'll take it as a definitely maybe. I will take up one thing with you, and you said that I think the most difficult job is being leader of the opposition. Probably the partner of the leader of oppositions or the partner of the prime minister. That's probably quite a tough job to do as well. But perhaps we'll ask one day. But no, I completely get that. Like,
Dennis seemed to have it good. Dennis seemed to get good. Dennis, you know, when Dennis was making millions, weren't he? Dennis was in Dennis. I mean, I always thought Dennis had it good. But then maybe it's different for women next to, you know, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
well, indeed. And yeah, you sit there and you think, yeah, why not me, I guess. I've just recently been watching Bobby Kennedy for president, and I'm probably obsessed by the civil rights movement in the sort of 60s in the US at the moment.
Is that a documentary or a series?
Yes, on Netflix. I have to say I've got no affiliate program with Netflix, but if you are listening, I am open for offers. But you sit there and you can't
placement there.
you can't help but be inspired. That's all I can say. It's absolutely phenomenal. And you know,
it's a documentary.
Documentary, yeah. So
I met his daughter. She's wow. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, 11 children and one that was born after he died. What a tragedy. Yeah, but I don't want to end it on a sort of a sad note. Because certainly you can do when you're talking about the Kennedy family. But just before we wrap up, Clive, you know, you've had such a varied career, civilian career, military reservist career and political career. But if there is that young lad like you and me coming home from cadets on a Thursday night who is a bit of a political geek and is thinking about you know, continuing their military career in the reserves or regulars and possibly politics, what's that bit of advice you'd give that person?
Be true to yourself. You know, don't try to force yourself into a political box that you think you should be in. You know, look at your own values. And I would argue the values of kinship, camaraderie, you know, the sisterhood, brotherhood of military life. You know, many of those values, I think, are socialist values. You know, they're values about the many. They're where we look out for each other. You know that expression, don't be a jack. You know, don't look out for yourself. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast. I shouldn't. But that was the expression that was used. Don't be Jack. You know, and it was about looking after number one. It was the team. You looked out for each other, and that pretty much is when you cut through it all. That's pretty much what the politics of the left are. There's lots of other bells and whistles that come onto that, but at its heart, it is about looking after one another, and putting the needs of the team, the collective, before the needs of the individual. The individual has a role, has a place, has needs, but they are part of a greater whole, and that we work together to achieve more. And I would say to anyone thinking of going into politics, remember that, be true to yourself and the values that you've learned from your time in the military. And if you want to go into politics, then I would say politics is crying out for people who have some of those military transferable skills that they can bring them over. And those are things like organization, and also, this is a really overused word, leadership, but it's about just kind of standing up and being counted. So when they're looking for volunteers, I know in the military, they always say never volunteer for anything. But, you know, when they're looking for, political parties are based on people volunteering. So, you know, you can lead by volunteering, by being the first person to put their hand up, by getting stuck in. So any kind of NCO, any officer knows that you need to lead by example a lot of the time. And there's nothing, you wouldn't order anyone to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. It's what a good leader is. Now, not everyone does that, and I think in politics, if you can show that, I'll be the one that goes to deliver the leaflets on that rubbish round that no one wants. And that shows something. That shows people that you're prepared to graft, that you're someone who has real values and commitment. And people are attracted to that. And if you do want to go far and through into politics, then those kind of things people remember, and they will naturally gravitate to you. And I think that will serve you in good stead. So be true to yourself and remember the values and the transferable skills that you've learned in the military. They'll stand you in good stead in politics. They really will.
Wow. What a brilliant way to end this show. Clive, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our chat. I think we could have chatted for a long time. And thanks again.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks for the chance.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.